for welcome Kris to the podcast, the source, the LightSource podcast. I'm excited to share with our audience, many or few, a little bit about you and who you are and what makes you so wonderful and why it's a joy working with you. So yeah, maybe I'd love to hear a quick introduction and maybe some background on yourself.
Sure. I genuinely appreciate you guys having me on and loving working with you guys. So my name is Kris Stasukaitis. I'm an associate director of mechanical commodity management at Shure Incorporated. Shure Incorporated is a high-end audio manufacturer of microphones and audio products, including conferencing systems. I've been with the company now for about 18 years. I came out and oddly enough, and Spencer knows this, I'm one of the few people that I'm aware of that actually got a degree and is still using their degree later on, and that exact same degree later on in life. So I graduated from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in 2001 with a degree in what is now, they've reclassified it as supply chain management. So
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. It's actually a topic that did you watch the podcast that we did with Eloise Epstein or just see
no,
the
I just got the clickbait on
Yeah.
it.
So it was interesting because there is like, one thing that is interesting is there's such a small number of supply chain logistics or procurement programs. There's like a few good ones, of course. Rutgers is one that I know about. Obviously, like Urbana is an amazing university in like,
Michigan State,
different
oddly,
ways.
like Middle Tennessee is like a very small university, and they've got an exceptional one.
Is it because there's like an industry in Middle Tennessee, like an industrials industry that like it feeds into? Because I get Michigan. That makes sense with Detroit and
Never
everything.
really, honestly, never really got the rationale as to why. It was always like that little factoid that caught me off guard as to why they were so good at it.
Interesting. That's fascinating. So how did you end up deciding that you wanted to study, supply chain logistics,
So when I
procurement?
was in school, I was in business. I didn't really have a clear direction. I just kind of wanted to figure it out. And they did an advertisement. When I said they reclassified it as supply chain management, initially it was called industrial distribution management (DM). So
Okay.
went to a seminar on it, and just the way all the pieces fit together sounded very interesting to me. And I really wanted to go into consulting, and it seemed like a fairly
Yeah.
clear path as to how to get in consulting. So, when you're young, you've got limited attachments and you want to bolster your career, it adds a high trajectory level that, if you can stick it out for a while, it gives you a lot of experience that you can build off later on. And the funny part is one of the reasons I mentioned they rebranded it was kind of like I did here. You spend, when you're in college, you're trying to get job interviews, you get a half an hour in the first 10 minutes of each
Yeah.
interview explaining what industrial distribution management is. So they're like, we're just going to cut to the chase and go with supply chain management years later.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Do you remember, was there any class either in high school or college that just got you like super amped up about the field that really inspired your excitement? I know I'm asking you to go back, 20 something years, but I'm always curious what inspires people to the space because for reference, 9 times out of 10, procurement finds you, you don't find it, right?
Exactly. Yep. There were probably two or three that really kind of spurred me. One was kind of a business management class that had a lot of case studies that was problem solving, and you had a lot of different you had to view it from a lot of different operational backgrounds. And, when you're 19 and 20 and you've got no background, it's all pie in the sky. So, you're
Right.
figuring it out, and then the professor's kind of walking you through, okay, good idea here. Well, not exactly how that works. And then I had this a professor for a purchasing class. And I mean, I
Okay.
remember the book was yay big and it could have been dry as all get out. But honestly,
Yeah,
this guy
sure.
just made it a ton of fun. And he was an older gentleman and he just had a great sense of humor. He's like, look, I've been here 35 years. They're not going to fire me. So he kind of did
Yeah,
what he
sure.
the way he wanted to do it. And it really kind of got you involved in what honestly can be a dry field potentially when you're starting out. If you think about it, like way back when in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of people were stuck in procurement. That's where you sent people to
Yeah.
go end their career, basically. It was just, cut a PO, do something transactional. It wasn't necessarily highly strategic at a lot of times, but it was starting to get
Yeah.
to that transformational aspect of it. And there was one other class that was kind of the capstone class at U of I, where it was a case study. You did an internship, you had to write a paper on an internship, and she was really the one that kind of helped me get into the idea of consulting. And that's really kind of the one that led me to my initial career path.
Interesting. And so you did end up in the world of consulting. You were at Accenture for a little bit and then Gibson, but then and then made your way to Shure. I'm kind of curious, what were some of the differences you noticed between being on the consulting side and being the industry side? And I know a lot of people will actually vacillate between those. Some people go into industry, then return to consulting, go back to industry, and vice versa.
Yeah, so when I came out, I started out at it was a boutique firm called Gibson Consulting, and I was there probably about 3 or 4 years. A lot of great mentors there. Actually, during that time, it really got me my international experience. So I was just coming off of a project. I was dating a girl for like 6 years. We had broken up, and
Mm,
somebody comes into the office one day and they're like, "Hey, we got a spot in just outside of London. If somebody wants to go for 3 weeks, could be 3 months." And I raised my hand, and they're like, "All right, well,
okay.
you're in the ring for it." So all of a sudden, Monday, they're like, "Yeah, you're locked in." Next Saturday, I'm on a flight, which turned out to be a 9-10 month engagement out at 𝗵𝗆𝗆 just outside of London. So that kind of got
Cool.
me the international exposure and kind of the jump start on interacting with Asia and Europe and everything like that, which was a huge
Yeah.
influence in what really helps me now in today in international strategic sourcing with Shure. So after that, I did end up like there was some waffling at the firm with ownership and whatnot. So I ended up going over Accenture. And the thing was, I Accenture is an exceptional company, but I was
Yeah.
used to a boutique firm. So you had to kind of make your own way. You had to staff yourself on projects. And honestly, it was way too big for me. So I
Sure.
wasn't really settling in there. And at the same time, two of the guys that I worked with at my previous firm, they had moved over with the old owner, and they gave me the full court press to come over what was Gibson 3. I honestly, it's been like 5 iterations of the name of the company. I
Yeah. Sure.
what it was at that time. So we had a project based out of Germany and Pittsburgh, a lot of time between there and China. So all in, I was probably in consulting at about 7 years. And during that time, when I was coming back from my London engagement, I had met my wife. So I was all about going back to Europe and everything. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
we started dating. I'm like, no, I'm good. I want to stay a little closer to home.
That's
So
great.
by the time we kind of settled in, we got married, and I'm like, want kind of how we started the conversation up. Want to have kids, but I'm on the
Of
road
course.
4 days a week or 3 weeks out of a month.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to start a family doing that and settling in. And I didn't want to hang her out to dry. So I started looking for industry. And oddly enough, Shure was a company that I had consulted with when I was at my
Yep.
first company. They
Yes.
didn't even I wasn't on the register roster. They like, no, it's not a conflict of interest. I had an interview for a position. It was in the similar field. It was for CEMs, basically, or PCBAs, and
Okay.
no experience with it. And I made it to the last round. Like, look, we love your skill set, and I'm like, I genuinely appreciate the offer. I was surprised I got this far. Well, it just
Wow.
so happened months later, I got a call. My wife and I are on our honeymoon. I get a call at 3 a.m. like, "Hey, Kris, you still interested in Shure?" And I'm like, 3 a.m. in Honolulu. Can I give you a call on Monday? I didn't recognize the number. Ended up back and forth, and I started out there then in a packaging specialist role. So packaging
Yeah.
and
Yes.
prod lit, and just kind of kept accumulating more and more background and knowledge and then more responsibilities.
Interesting. And so how has the business changed? Because it's funny, like Shure is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year, right?
Yes.
And there's if as I understand it, there's going to be a big celebration, or maybe there already was.
Everything's all, yeah. So our anniversary was at the end of April, and we celebrated it in Niles as one of the larger kickoffs for everybody there. And across the globe, there's been cascading celebrations to try to get all the associates. And the last one had just happened last Friday, actually down in Juarez. Part of it was so the executives could have time to go, like a group subset of the executives could make their way to all of them. On top of it,
Yeah.
Juarez, there were a lot of associates, and it gets real hot down there during the summer. So they wanted to push it back to
Yeah.
a little bit later in the summer, early fall, where it was a little bit more manageable with the heat. So we're just
What's an
winding down
associate?
all the parties. Our employees. So we refer to everybody as associates.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it sounds a little like mafia like, it's like my associates will handle that. No, that's great. And so, it's crazy to think about in some ways when you hear a company's 100 years old. that's generations. It's a really substantial business. But when I look at your career, you're almost been there for 20 years, right? So it's like we're talking like a sizable chunk of that. I'm kind of curious, how have you seen Shure change over that time? How is it different today than when you first started? What have you noticed?
We've grown substantially. So, I mean, we've grown with a multiplier effect. And a lot of that had to do with some leadership decisions that our CEOs have made, which
Sure.
were exceptional, actually. We were
Yeah.
really focused on audio, microphones, and kind of to that area for a long time. We were in conferencing for a while, but when we kind of went all in, we were doing a heck of a job. And it really helped diversify our portfolio, had a solid growth trajectory. And the
Mhm.
diversification that they had done beyond just the growth trajectory that's happened over the last 18 years, it really saved us. In 2008, during COVID, when people are
Mm,
switching off. I mean, now I'm using here an MB7, which is a content microphone that
yeah.
content creator microphone, which that was gangbusters during COVID because everybody's doing what
Yeah.
I'm doing now, working from home, right? So even
Yeah.
at that time, schools were retrofitting to put conferencing systems because maybe the professors were talking, but the students were still at home. So they needed better audio. Strategic decisions were huge in the growth trajectory and the markets that we've diversified to. On top of it,
Yeah.
we're approaching the business in general. At the time, it was and it still is, it's got a family feel to it. But right
Okay.
now, there's a lot, even with the family feel, there is we're starting to put a lot more business analytics around the gives and takes of stuff. So it's really helping to justify, return on investment and things of that nature. So I think it's just getting more structured in the approach.
Interesting. Well, I will tell you, like, and you've known this since we first met. I'm an enormous Shure fan. I've been as a musician. Many people in our company are musicians. I've been aware of the microphones, the SM7, forever. I mean, it's iconic, and it's funny when I went to a Blink 182 concert in San Francisco like a year ago as a company outing, and I saw all these mics with these big fins on them that were pointed at the stage and stuff like that for the recording. And I mean, Shure is everywhere. And once you see the logo, if you like lock that in mentally, you just open your eyes at any venue, you're going to see a ton of amazing equipment, professional audio gear. So I guess a question I'm sort of curious about is, has the supply chain for audio equipment, have you seen any, like, I would say, global shifts in the way that people are thinking about stuff, versus, I'm thinking US versus China. I know you guys have a team in China, so maybe instead of flying to Europe for Gibson, maybe you're doing a lot more travel, but just to a different continent. I'm kind of curious how like the presence of China has changed over time, if you've seen it in the last 17 years.
So in general, it has a ton. Even when I first started in consulting, China/Asia in general was kind of the go-to for low-cost sourcing. Obviously, it was still considered a very developing nation. Just since then, now I'm getting on, 20 some odd years just in the field in general. It's becoming less cost competitive in general because of the labor rates that you're seeing, the materials, the transport costs back, and obviously now we've got the geopolitical climate of tariffs really kicking into play. For a long time, I guess even when I came on, we were heavily into Asia, depending on what part. It wasn't all in China, but it was a substantial
Yeah.
amount of our spend was in Asia. Well, right now, like a lot of companies, we are actually trying to regionalize where possible and practical for a variety of reasons. One, like I mentioned before, China, they've got an exceptional supply chain. But at the same time, it's not necessarily as cost competitive as it used to be, which now makes Mexico in play or the southern US or other entities. And then when you start taking the total cost of ownership into the equation, well, if we're now supplying our Juarez facility, it can make more sense to have something in Mexico. And then we can service our Suzhou facility somewhere out of Asia and really balance those costs overall. The
Hmm.
interesting thing, though, is like a lot of folks are trying to do that right now. So a lot of people are running to Mexico, and Mexico is a very challenging environment to source in because of the way it's designed. I think that right now it's very geared toward automotive and or larger commercial products or high runners in general. We tend to be high mix, low volume. So unless you're a big player in there, you've got to find a very niche supplier that's willing to entertain you. You know, automotives down there, appliances, etc. I think there's a lot of exceptional suppliers in Asia, but honestly, even for us in China, it was always hard to find that right match because it's got to be somebody that's willing to do it with Shure's quality, which has always been the apex of everything
Yeah.
we do. It's got to have our cosmetic standards to it because we are on camera a lot of the time. We tend to have highly engineered parts. And like I mentioned, we're high mix, low volume. And by the way, we want a reasonable cost. You know, we're not looking for the cheapest cost that's out there because a lot of the times you get what you pay for. But when you put
Yeah.
all those variables in there, the pond of fishing gets real small.
Yeah. Well, if when you're, this is super helpful context, Kris. So when you're out there looking for, a source in Mexico, for example, how does that process work? What's like where's the granule of the idea beginning? Like, hey, we should develop a sourcing strategy that involves suppliers in a new region, maybe dual sourcing depending on the region that we're in. Then how do you go about finding those suppliers? How do you go about vetting and building a relationship? Because it is, the easiest thing to do, right, is not to switch, right? The easiest thing to do is work with the known, the devil versus the devil you don't. And there's risk and cost involved in qualifying and building up a new supplier. So, talk me through an example of a time, or just conceptually, how that works for you in your process. And then I'm curious about times when it's gone really well. And then if there's any examples where you're like, hey, I've seen it also not go well, and what's gone wrong historically.
So you kind of hit two of the points. It's risk and cost are really what drives a lot.
Yeah.
So early on, even in my career at Shure, we were looking at, okay, what's going to be the next China? Because something always evolves, right? For a while, the US was outsourced back in the 1800s, and then it went on to another country, and then it was Taiwan, and then it was China. Well, eventually, the cost of living catches up, and then people aren't necessarily as thrilled what the MLB is for the products that you're getting in because of that country. So we started taking a look as to, okay, where is that going to evolve to? Well, it was hit or miss at that time as to what it was going to be because China was still holding the line on where they were holding, where all the costs were and everything like that. And on top of it, we've got a facility in China. So we wanted to make sure that we could service the facility as effectively as possible. Now, so we've always been looking for the risk mitigation aspect. When you have all your eggs in one basket or all your products in one country, there's a big problem there. And we were trying to beat that drum for a long time. When 8 years ago or so in Trump's first administration, when tariffs started kicking up, people started listening. Okay, we can't be all in on one. We've got to start diversifying in case, things flex here or there.
Yes.
So we started getting people to listen. And then when COVID kicked in, people really listened because China was shut down. Mexico was shut down in subsets. US. So if you don't have another switch that you can flip, you're dead. Like your manufacturing is not there anymore until the government or the health department says, hey, you can come back online. And, you with a supply chain background know that it doesn't always come up smoothly. It takes time to ramp. It takes time to get the people back in. And are you getting the same people back in? So what we want to do is, like you mentioned, there is risk and cost of getting a new supplier in, but in all sincerity, there's a bigger risk and cost of not having it diversified in case you're sitting there dead in the water.
Well, how do you build that cost estimation in upfront? Because I feel like a lot of times as people or business people, I feel like we can sometimes be short-sighted, right? It's like, hey, this is a pain point today. This is a flavor of the week. We need to mitigate this. But then it's like, okay, COVID's over. Biden's in the White House. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of tariff changes. Do you then prepare for the next time that happens? Or do you go back to the saying like, okay, the water's calm. Let's not think about that until it's a problem. And then, at Tesla, we would dual source certain things, but it was always like, darn, like if we want to dual source this, we have to pay double CapEx because we're making two sets of tools, whereas we didn't have to before. And it was always hard to justify on like a future looking risk basis to make expenditures today to the finance team. So I guess there's sort of two questions embedded in there. One is like, how much were those changes from COVID and Trump term one, things that like durably change behavior, even when those things weren't as hot? And then the second is more on the side of how do you justify the expenditure from a finance perspective for these risk mitigations when it's not immediately clear that those long tail things will happen, you know?
So I think part of it, I think they're both kind of intertwined. So Tesla is obviously a public entity. Shure is
Sure.
not. That does not mean that we do not need to be fiscally responsible by all means, but we don't have to answer to Wall Street on a quarter to quarter basis. So being a private company allows us the opportunity to make strategic investments for the long-term play. So that's why even if the water's calm now, I mean, just over the last 20 years in our lifetimes, we've seen a lot of ebbs and flows just in general, whether it's regional, whether it's, I mean, obviously we now need to take, things like COVID epidemics into the equation. We've got all the natural disasters that are in play, which are getting more and more, and that can hit a region at any time as well. So it's basically the cost of insurance, right? No one wants to use their health insurance, no one wants to use their car insurance, but you're sure glad when it's there. So that's really the justification. But you need to make sure that for that cost of insurance, kind of what you mentioned, you're building the appropriate business case. And
Yes.
you pick and choose where your biggest wins are going to be. So, because we're a high mix, low volume company, we're not going to dual source everything. We're not going to risk mitigate everything. We're going to put other strategies in place. But there are things where if we go down on a part, it's going to cascade and it's going to be a very, very large impact. That's pick a number, $10,000, $50,000 on the CapEx. Well, that's quote unquote protecting potentially X millions of dollars. So now don't get me
Right.
wrong, you've got to take into account the people factor
Yeah.
and everything like that, the time to qualify. But when you go on that type of equation, you can justify it fairly quickly.
It's interesting. And have and frankly, I know the team is using LightSource, but I'm not as close to the day-to-day nuts and bolts usage. Have you found it helpful? I know we have a bomb functionality where you can see, for example, if you look at a given part, what bombs that part lives within. Has that been a functionality you guys have explored yet? In all candor, I'm kind of curious.
The NPS group, so our new product sourcing specialists are the ones that are exploring, they're
Yeah.
utilizing that more. My team tends to deal with the parts after they've been deployed. We support the NPS products, the NPS group when they're getting kicked off, whether they just need sourcing direction or options to go. But honestly, that's a really good group in and of themselves. So with
Yeah.
little direction, they know what they can go do. For the bulk of it, they understand our supply base. We're really here to help support when things really kind of get wonky. But so I do think that's going to be a good function. I believe, and I would need to clarify that our electrical team on the PCBAs use that a little bit more because it's the
Yeah.
board
Yeah.
plus all the components that are in.
Yeah, no, I mean it's there. And by the way, light sources, has like huge range of capabilities. And if I'm lucky, if a given customer has really nailed 5 of the use cases with it, then I'm like, I can sleep really well at night, feeling like they're getting value. I guess another question I'm kind of curious about is, on this NPI side of the equation, I mean, how often do you find yourself working with the engineering teams? Because I feel like a lot of times different orgs have different views on this. Like, how much do they want the engineering team interfacing with directly with suppliers? Because there can be good design collaboration there, but there's also the risk of things like vendor lock-in, or maybe the engineer says too much, and then it lets up on a little bit of that sort of negotiating leverage from like, hey, we're not sure if we're going to source you yet, but that can be negated if there's too much, co-design and IP involved. So I'm kind of curious, how do you swing that balance? How are you working with engineers? How do you prevent vendor lock-in? Or is that not an issue?
It's a fine line and it can happen. I mean, it can inadvertently happen with anybody saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. What we've done internally is we've got a lot of cross-functional teams. So for any particular commodity out there, if you want to call it die castings, PCBAs, metal fab, we have it's PDD, product. I'm gonna kick myself, but
Product.
it's a design and development. Maybe that's going to be edited out, by the way. But
Yeah, yeah.
PDD, which is our engineering group, so they are a key part of our cross-functional commodity teams.
DP, I guess, is product development process. I'm just looking it up on Google. It may be something else though.
It is sure. I would have to look up.
And this is why it's not live.
You know what? I will look it up after the fact because I do know it, but I'm having a brain gaffe right now.
That's all good.
But
Good. Well, I don't know either, so that makes two of us. We're in the same boats. So, okay, the PDP group, what's their sort of role?
there we go. So our PDD group is our engineering group. So they're really designing the products. They're the ones that are getting creative and really meeting what we need to come out to market. But beyond that, they're on our commodity teams. So they're one of the key inputs on helping develop the strategies for how we source. So our commodity teams typically have somebody from one of my teams on there or my associates teams on there, a commodity manager, which is kind of running the team, kind of driving the meetings, helping talk through the strategies. We have a tactical buyer on there to make sure that the tactical aspects considered. We have an SQE, supplier quality engineer, on there to make sure that the quality aspect is met. We have the PDD, which is the engineer on there, one of the design or creating engineers on there to make sure that they have the engineering capabilities to manufacture the products. Sometimes,
Mhm.
depending on what we're doing, we might have a marketing individual on there because there's high cosmetic
Interesting.
specs, things of that nature. But what we try to do is collaborate as close as possible, define what our primary supply base is going to be for any given commodity. So, we'll have preferred, we'll have approved, we'll kind of have middle of the road and other people that are sub-performing. Your goal, as you know from your background, is to drive it to the better performing suppliers, assuming you're not overloading them with too much business.
Right.
So when we've developed that relationship where I believe in general, for the most part, everybody's got a fairly good working relationship where they work closely. Our PDD group works very closely with our NPS group to try to have those conversations where it's not giving up too much information, letting the NPS group member really interface with the suppliers. And like you said, when it gets to design and whatnot,
Yeah.
we're on the conversation to just kind of see how things are going along. But I think we've gotten to a point where it's gotten, it's going to happen in any organization, but
Yeah.
I think for the most part, we're in a really good shape where we have a highly collaborative environment where people work well together.
That's great. I mean, look, that's amazing. By the way, that was the way it felt at Tesla. We'd have a lot of cross-functional meetings where it'd be procurement with engineering. We called it design engineering or development engineering, something like that. And then we had the procurement team. It was always us with finance sitting down at one table and figuring it all out. And sourcing council, very much the same. I don't know if you guys do this, but like at Tesla, we had a sourcing council. So you'd have to bring to sourcing council like a package that would explain exactly, what are the commodities, what are the components, what would you do during the RFQ process, and why are you choosing the supplier, and any qualification that was done up front before sort of giving them the award. I'm kind of curious if you're a supplier and you're interested in getting involved in Shure or like supplying to Shure, what's the best pathway to find an entry to onboard as a vendor? Is it meeting with the category manager? Is it meeting with an engineer? Do you guys have like an online intake form which is like, hey, if you want to make yourself known to us, just fill something out here? I'm kind of curious thinking about the supplier's perspective.
Honestly, that's a really good question. A lot of what because of kind of some of the parameters that I outlined earlier, a lot of where we've had good fortune with finding suppliers is somebody that you've worked with in the past. So a lot of networking. What we try to do is we try to have either the leverage the engineer's previous excuse me, the engineer's previous experience, the supplier quality's previous experience, our commodity management's previous experience, combined with any kind of the research that's available out there and do the outreach. Now, occasionally, suppliers, you'll get a cold call or something like that where it looks interesting, you vet them and go through that. But that can be a bit
Yeah.
arduous as well because one, it's luck of the draw on the supplier side. Two, some people will go on a complete shotgun approach where anybody that they can get their email, they'll start hitting them. And at that point, it's like, this isn't how we do business. So thank you, but no thank you. So it's, that's a good question. And that's honestly something that we should consider probably a little bit more so is if somebody wants to do outreach to us, what the best path is to do
Yeah.
possibly with some level. This one would be difficult because a self-assessment is always difficult without knowing exactly what you're getting into, but some level of a pre-qualification saying, look, I might be a good fit based on these parameters rather than a shotgun approach.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting because I remember with certain companies, like, I met the team at Caterpillar when I was at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show,
Yeah.
earlier this year. And I sort of met with some folks. I was like, hey, what's the best way to make, because LightSource is a vendor too, right? We're just in the software category. I said, well, what's the best way to meet the folks who may benefit from what we have to offer? And they said, we have a supplier intake form. And so you can fill it out and you put in some basic information, then it gets stored in our database. And if somebody needs to draw on new vendors, they might look through it. Now, of course, there's no feedback and you don't know. You feel like you're shooting a cannon out into outer space. Who knows, if it'll ever come back. But it is interesting to think about the structured process. Like, how do we make ourselves available to suppliers to like advertise what they've got going on? Because there's so many folks out there that we may not even be aware of. I mean, I guess I'm kind of curious, like, what was it like during the chip shortage? You guys are making a highly engineered product with a lot of electronics. That's part of the audio equipment space. And one of the notable features of the pandemic was that you couldn't get every component that you wanted when you wanted it. How did you guys deal with that? How did you mitigate it now that we're on the other side,
It was a challenging time. It was a challenging time for absolutely everybody. Our
Yeah.
team on the electrical side, they did an exceptional job. So a lot of it was leveraging relationships because we don't, like you kind of mentioned earlier, the flavor of the week, we don't really do that. We try to really embed and strengthen relationships with our suppliers. And they realize that we're not going to be jumping ship for a nickel here or whatnot. So by building that relationship, a lot of the times you can have those open dialogues and communicate your wants and your needs and get a realistic answer as to where you are in the queue or where you are, if you can even jump the queue or, what the downtime is going to be.
Yeah.
So I think that really helped us do a lot of planning as to when we can build, because the honest answer at that point was it was legitimately not available, like spot market, anything.
Yes.
So then you've got to defer on certain things and prioritize other things. So we had a really good team doing a lot of work. Our engineering team really stepped up and did a lot of redesign, like I think a lot of other folks did, to kind of get some alternate chips that were in play, assess, do we need all of this? How can we make it more efficient that we can eliminate something that maybe is a constraint at this time? So I think yet again, it kind of goes back to that collaboration that everybody was doing. That and I mean, the relationships that we really build with our vendors were a key aspect of what got us through there.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a ton of sense. You remember I remember we had some customers that were paying like 40x premium for certain ICs. And then there was the other fear, which is that there were some counterfeits happening at that time because the prices were so high
Yeah.
that people were like, oh, we can just, take something else, scrub the top off because you know how lightly it's etched on the IC, and
Yeah.
then just print something else and say it's something different. But that's a huge risk, people buying, from the gray market, Was that ever something that you encountered or you at least heard war stories of?
I don't know that we got hit with anything that was counterfeits. I can't say for sure because I wasn't that close to it at that time. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you were seeing the 40x out in the marketplace because that's the price that people were willing to pay. And you've got to do the
Yeah.
analysis at that point saying, okay, am I willing to pay this to get, is the margin impact I'm going to take on this product worth it? Yes or no? And it comes down to that business decision. And honestly, sometimes the answer is yes, because you're selling
Yeah.
it at, I mean, we do not sell cheap products. So if a chip cost $1 and now it's $40 and that's what it takes, $39 hit isn't going to, it's more important to get the product out the door than it is to
Yes.
sit on that. So
Yeah. I mean, certainly in the automotive space, those were folks who were, I think, forking up real dough for it. Cause there were some cars where it was like they had everything. I remember actually a company we worked with where they had vehicles sitting on the lot. They were just missing one ABS chip or something like that. And it was like, we have to that's the only thing. So we're going to continue making them because we don't want to stop the line. But the minute that those things are available, we're going to be like, boop, 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 putting them in there. And we're talking like a expensive, tens of thousands of dollar vehicle per.
there were a lot. I mean, even basic stuff with electronics. I mean, during COVID, we were like a lot of people where we're like, we don't know when we're coming out of this. So we built our backyard to kind of be our oasis. We ended up getting a hot tub. Well, we went out. Yeah, well, it kind of goes directly to the electronic shortage at the time, though, because we go out and there's a hot tub and they're like, look, this hot tub's available in 3 to 4 months. And my wife's like, okay, well, what if we do this other option that you mentioned? They go, oh, that's 18 to 24 months. She's like, that's good because it was that
Okay.
one chip that was not available to make it go from a white light to a multicolor light or whatever the feature was. But
Yeah, yeah,
case in point right there, it's like the waiting line, because everybody and their family wants this right now, is here,
yeah,
versus you want that one little modification like you were talking about with the car. Well, get in the back of the line for 2 years. So
yeah, of course. What makes you think maybe it's the Model T thing, you know, any LED color you want as long as it's black, you
black,
know?
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess this is a I would say a bit of a pie in the sky kind of question, but I think also a hard question. Something that I was thinking about earlier today, which is that you know in procurement, how do you know if you're getting a good price from suppliers or getting a fair price? And I think you know because if you are getting a fair price or a good price, that's a time to let sleeping dogs lay or just thank your suppliers and say thank you for being good to us. And then there's times where the price isn't right, and then of course it's incumbent to go create some kind of competitive pressure, negotiate, bring more data to the table, you know, dangle the preferred supplier opportunity for new programs, you know, all of the different strategies that are involved. So I guess the question bearing the lead a little bit is, you know, how do you know if you're getting a good price in procurement, in direct materials?
There's a variety of different things. Old school was just simply benchmarking, like you take it out to
Yeah,
market, you test the market. Now that can always be questionable as well, because if you're doing something that's highly specified or has some nebulous specs around it, and I don't mean nebulous as though it's not spec'd well, but our cosmetics, everybody thinks they can do our cosmetics until they try to do our cosmetics, because it
hmm,
is very hard. When we first came in, a lot of people refer to our die casts as jewelry. They had to be that precise because, yet again, a microphone here is on camera. Well, if you're talking about Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl coming up here, that thing needs to look great, right? It can't have that little ding mark or whatever. You want to make sure that it's pristine. Well, die casts are hard to do it like that. So that's one way, obviously, is going through the benchmarking aspect of it. But we also take the benchmarking aspect of it, and here's a plug for your tool a little bit. We were doing should cost modeling as best we could prior to LightSource coming on. But with the LightSource tool and how deep we can get into it and how efficiently we can get into it with our suppliers, that helps us benchmark that at a more granular level to determine, okay, is this really in line with what market conditions should be? Now, even to your point, if you're getting a fair price from a supplier, Sure's motto, and we stand by this, is you need to make money as a supplier. Otherwise, there's
sure.
no reason that you're going to want to service us. It's not good for our relationship if you're throwing money out the door. We're not going to we want what we want. And even if you get what you want in the short term, eventually you're going to be out of business. Makes no sense, but it's got to be cost competitive. But as we're going through and we identify a fair price, assuming we don't touch somebody's margin, as long as it's reasonable, mind you, we can identify
Yeah,
cost buckets in there where maybe the machining on a part is out of line for whatever reason. Maybe the setup cost, maybe it's the time, maybe it's the overhead. If you can identify that and have that data driven conversation with a supplier, that's a win-win for both of you guys, because we can start driving our costs down yet again without touching their margin. B, if they start driving those costs down, maybe all their other one of two things, maybe all their other customers aren't as savvy,
yes.
they hold the same prices, garner an increased profit, or they can lower the prices somewhat and attract more business.
Right, absolutely. You know, it's funny, we would do the same, we would have that same sort of mindset for the most part at Tesla, but the challenge was that sometimes, you know, even if we were saying 15% is a fair margin for this commodity, it was still that if you reduce the overall cost, you're still eroding the margin dollars. And so how often do you find yourself saying, hey, look, we're going to protect the margin percentage versus we're going to protect the absolute dollar amount?
I think it depends on the price point of the product. I think it's a case
Yeah.
by case basis.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so I guess another question I'm kind of curious about. This has been a very, very interesting conversation. When you think about, because you've got kids, I know that. I know they're also like real athletes. When you talk to them, do you encourage them to consider getting into the field of procurement and supply chain? Or, and this might be a parenting question, it might also be an industry question. Or do you say, hey, look, I don't want to influence your world. You do what is interesting to you. But by and large, do you feel like you would encourage people to get into this field? And what would you want to see from someone to decide, hey, look, you're really going to be good at this versus, hey, actually stick with computer science, you know?
So I'll answer your second question first. Yes, I would encourage people to get in this field. I do think just the complexities behind it and the need for it is not going to be eroding anytime soon. Unless we can legitimately start unless I order a part from you and you can start 3D printing that part that meets all of my specifications in my plants, there's always going to be a need. And by the way, even if you can do that, there's going to be somebody like me that needs to find somebody like you that can do that at what we talked about, a fair price earlier. So supply chain, am I going to say it's ever going to go away? I can't. I mean, things disappear, but supply chain's always been critical, back to even
Yeah, of course.
military lines in the what you call it, BC era. I mean, it was critical for survival of troops out there. Obviously different form and factor, but it's been around that long. That being said, no, I don't influence my children to get into anything. My whole thing is figure out what you like and go with your passion. My
Yeah,
son, it was funny because I'm a proud University of Illinois grad, as I mentioned earlier.
yeah,
Love it. I got a lot of friends there. A lot of my best stories come from there, and just kind of my experiences. My son goes, "Look, if I got a scholarship to Harvard or U of I," I'm like, "Son, pick the one you want." Like, Harvard's an
yeah,
exceptional school. Whatever's going to suit you. Don't do what I did because I did it. So
yeah.
it's try to tell my daughter the same thing. It's like, follow your passion. You got to be passionate about something. You got to find something that drives you, but whatever that is, do it. This isn't for everybody. The hours can get wonky because we're in international business. So, I mean, I was on
Mhm.
calls till 10 last night. I think you were on a meeting with us 2 weeks ago where we're doing a video conference until 11 plus PM my time, and then starting the next day at 8 a.m. my time. That happens from time. It's not for everybody, and kind of the flight schedules, right? When travel gets hectic, especially as you have a family, it can have some wear and tear on you. That being said, though, it's fulfilling. You get to see
Yes.
the benefit of it. One of the key differences that I feel as though in my career now versus when I was in consulting is you'd be brought in as a hired gun to go help the company get better,
Yeah.
to save money, to do
Yeah. Yeah.
task. You move on. Whatever you recommend, you're not necessarily there to see if it ever gets implemented. You may never know. When I came to Shure, the nice thing is we're producing a tangible product that
Yeah.
I see it every day. And like, just being that small part of it, kind of like you mentioned earlier, you see Shure, right? You can see it up
Yeah.
there. It's like people at our company feel a tie to that. And it's nice to know that you're even just the smallest part of doing something to get that out there. It was funny, like earlier on when you were mentioning the Shure aspect of it, that happens for a lot of stuff. When I was in consulting, we were sourcing logistics and I'm like, "Hey, there's an X truck." And my wife's like, "Shut up." Like, yes, you've said that the last time. You've talked to them, you sourced them, you've
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I mean, it's also nice that Sure, especially being, I mean, I'm biased, but being the number one, you know what I mean? Like, it probably feels a lot better knowing that you guys are delivering the product that is chosen consistently by professionals, as opposed to like, hey, we're making something that's a clone of Sure, slightly worse, slightly cheaper. You know what I mean? And that's got to feel really good. I mean, I guess a question is like, let's say that do you feel more excited by the field of procurement or by the product? Meaning, I guess another way of asking it is, would you feel just as excited about the work if you were sourcing for something that was totally different, or even maybe even more extreme, sourcing for virtual goods, doing like indirect? Or is that the connection with the product and, being physical and being like castings and powder coating and PCBAs, like the tangibility of it, is that a big part of what drives your passion?
I wouldn't say they're necessarily divided. So if I never fell into Shure per se, Shure specifically, and I had the environment and the team that type of team that I got to work with, and the support from management and stuff like that, then yes, it would, whatever the company was, it could be widgets. I mean, pick your widget. I don't want to say anything that feels like it's a lesser product.
Yeah, of course.
Whatever it is, right? Just pick it. As
Yeah.
long as you're doing it and you're surrounded by people that you can work with, you can build a genuine relationship, and everybody's working toward the same goal to solve problems, then yes. And whether it's virtual, whether it's tangible, whether it's whatever, but the company in and of itself, I mean, companies ebb and flow with the economic times. There's times where everybody's pressed to do more with less. You're challenged because of, the 2008, the market collapse, people are on edge. But at the same time, that's when you feel that around you where like, look, I could be in a lot worse position because my company cares about me as a person. I'm not the next guy to get cut just because of it. You love that company or you have that loyalty to that company as well. So even if I wasn't doing this at Shure, I could probably be happy at Shure. I don't know what else I'd be doing. I mean, I'm 20x
Yeah.
plus years into my career though. So.
Yeah, of course. I do not think that you are company hopping. That is one thing that I have to say is certain.
Well, it's funny though, like you mentioned, getting on 16 years, I'm not a baby at the company anymore, but by no means am I senior. And what I mean by that is one of my close friends in my department just retired after 47 years.
47?
And she is not even number one on our seniority list when she retired. There are
Wow.
a lot of people. We were at my last when my VP was giving out pins early September. I was the second named called out of probably 15. And they went from youngest in the company to oldest about that pinning ceremony. So there was 18, there was 20, 23, 24, 25. So
Wow.
that kind of
That's
goes
a
to the company, like, it's a great company to
yeah.
work for. You stick around with it.
Yeah, it's amazing. It is funny because like I feel like especially in the tech world, people tend to view their jobs a little bit like they treat it like renters more than owners, you know? You don't really, you never wash a rental car. And, a lot of times people go to a company, work there for 2 years, collect some stock, go to the next company, work there for 2 years, build up a little portfolio. And I mean, there is something that is nice about the sort of long-term dedication and the feeling of comfort. And then be able to say, hey, look, there are things outside of work that are also really important. And if you can like keep those things in consistency and balance, I think it makes for a very wonderful life. And so,
You are
yeah,
100% correct. I mean, years ago, I was getting recruited by somebody from my old management consulting firm, and they're like, hey, you want to make some extra money and come here for 2 or 3 years before you move on? I mean, that was kind of their pitch. I'm like, no, no, I don't. I've got a family. I like I said, I like the company, but I like stability. I've got kids
of course,
that,
yeah.
we're getting ready for college and all that. So
It's great. It's great. Look, and I will tell you that some of your counterparts who, did the Apple thing at that time, they would live in China sometimes for 5 months at a clip. It would cause, I mean, there was uh, an entire, I met this guy named Patrick McGee who wrote this book called Apple in China, an amazing book, would highly recommend it. He's going to actually do a podcast in a few weeks, I believe. And they had like some kind of, you could have some special kind of PTO that was related to family issues that derived from being in China too long. So it'd be like you get like this courtesy extra 2 weeks or something if you needed it because stuff wasn't right at home. And so that kind of intensity, it's got its merits and they did great things, but there's also merits for sure of doing the opposite direction. But last question, how sick are you of puns related to the word sure? And things like for sure, we can't be sure.
just get used to it after a while. I mean, you even fall into it yourself as an associate. It just happens.
Yeah, that's great. Well,
It
Kris,
was funny though when I was in consulting, they said, "Hey, I'm a newbie, so you're doing all the grunt work. Go research these guys, get the profile." And they're like, "You're going to Shure." I'm looking at Shure. I'm like, "Are we talking about the SURE? Because that's a bank vault thing." And I had no idea who we were. So
interesting.
there's, like you mentioned, there's so many variants of it that it's like, okay, you got to be real specific on it unless you know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could identify the company by the color at this point. That black and green. It's just quite iconic. Well, Kris, this has been awesome. The thing is, this does not feel like work for me because I have always enjoyed our conversations. In
I
fact, we do
agree.
dinner voluntarily. So that's a really nice thing. And so, is there anything else you want to share with the audience that you're thinking about? Any questions that I didn't ask that you feel like I actually could have or should have?
No, like you said, I think this is conversational. I do want to say I do value our working relationship.
Yeah,
I think your company that you have, the associates that you brought on, I think they bring a lot of value. We work with a lot of high level associates that honestly they've done great things with us, and the team truly enjoys working with them. We do hope that we have a long tenured relationship with your team. So I think it's, yeah, I mean, honestly,
great. I love to hear that. It's more than a job for me. So it's my baby, and you're telling me my baby's not ugly and that we've got really good care for the baby. So, and you've given me some positive feedback on specific folks, and I have passed that along. I've given people kudos. So keep it coming, but it doesn't mean that we can't be better, right? And so if there's things that, we can do that come up that you're like, hey, Spence, like here's 8 things that I love. By the way, here's 2 things that I need you to step in and work on or improve. That's the way that we grow. So, never feel like it means that I don't feel the love.
So the one thing that I will keep beating the drum on is actually it goes part and parcel back to what we were talking about
Sure.
before. So what could make the tool even more holistic is some level of a more integrated supplier research feature. So not just the module that's in there, but whether it's paired with AI and some sort of feature where it really helps vet companies based on profile, size, etc. So I'm not saying it's just a spend management tool, because in my opinion, it's a lot more than that, but you can start really going from cradle to grave of supplier identification, bringing the qualitative vetting process on, bringing the spend management, the contracts, all the way soup to nuts. I think that would be kind of the coup d'etat for what really, for me, it would put the ribbon on top of everything.
Yeah. I mean, look, I love the feedback. In another day, I would love to share with you a few of the things we're thinking about on our roadmap and get your 2 cents on it. Because there's so many things that our eyes are bigger than our stomach in a lot of ways. We've got so much time, but but I agree with you, and we have to figure out what are the right things that we should be building next, especially given that the progress that's happening in the AI space is amazing.
Yeah. Yep. No, I completely understand.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for the time. I know we're about at time, so I just want to say thanks again for stopping by. It's great chatting with you.
You as well. Enjoy your time out on the East Coast. Look forward to talking again soon.
See you, Chris.
Take care. Bye.